Church, happy Easter. My name is David. I am so glad to be here today. I'm so glad that you're here. We get to share Resurrection Sunday together. This is what it's all about. Resurrection Sunday for Christians, this is the most important day because everything hinges on the resurrection for us. The Apostle Paul, one of the first ever followers of Jesus and one of the, if not the greatest missionary in all of Christian history, he framed the importance of the resurrection like this. He said, if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is useless and so is your faith. Meaning, look, if the resurrection isn't true, then Christianity, it just doesn't work. Not morally, not emotionally, not historically, not spiritually. If there is no resurrection, then there is no faith. There is no hope. And I'm about to waste 30 minutes of your life. But the resurrection did, Paul says, indeed Christ has been raised. Next verse, yeah. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. And because he has raised everyone who belongs to Christ, everyone who says, yes, I put my trust in Jesus, invite him into my life, will be given new life. Meaning, when he talks about new life, he's saying we'll experience a new kind of life from what we have known before, what we could know without God. When we come into faith with Jesus and we put our trust in him because of his resurrection, we're able to have a God-connected life. We're able to experience and to know God for real, to have the kind of life, a life of purpose and freedom that we could not have without God. A life that begins now and never ends. And that's why we celebrate the resurrection, not just as a historical event that happened 2,000 years ago, but as a reality that is happening, that we can all personally experience. But there's a challenge to this, and maybe you feel it, and it's simply this, that resurrection, it's impossible. It's unbelievable. And everybody knows this. What's dead stays dead. It's kind of one of the rules of life. And I think that it's fair, and I think that it's actually right to begin any conversation about the resurrection from that assumption, because it's certainly where Jesus' own disciples began. His disciples didn't believe it when they first heard it. In fact, even when they saw it, they still just couldn't see it. They knew how death works, and they saw how Jesus died, and they know you don't come back from that. However, every one of them, as they began to examine it and check it out for themselves, and they began to recognize evidence of the resurrection in their own story, not just as something that happened to Jesus, but something that was happening to them and their own life, they began to believe the unbelievable. And I think that's what makes this claim, this persistent claim that Jesus rose from the dead, I think that's what makes it both so compelling and also so important for us to examine. Because if the resurrection did happen, then it's the most important thing that has ever happened. Because it validates everything that Jesus said and everything that he said about himself, and it also changes everything for us. If it's true, it's essential that we don't miss it. And that begs the question that we're going to be wrestling with today and asking today, how can I recognize resurrection in my own story? Have you ever been asked to find something but you had no idea what you're looking for? Like, where's Waldo? That's easy, right? Well, I mean, it's not easy, but at least you know what to look for. You look for stripes. But anybody ever, you come home and your partner's there and you can tell that he or she is upset, and so you ask, what's wrong? And the response you get is what? You don't know? You know you're in trouble then. Because you can't find the thing when you don't know what you're looking for. You don't know what it looks like. Well, my hope today is just simply to help you to recognize what resurrection looks like. Obviously, my prayer, my hope for you is that you would go beyond just simply seeing the resurrection and what it looks like, but that you would respond to it. That you would put your faith in Jesus and that you would experience him giving you that new kind of life. But the truth is, I'll tell you, I don't think I can prove the resurrection to anybody here today. When I was in high school, we had a term paper due. It was a 10-page term paper. It was supposed to be a persuasive essay. What I turned in was 40 pages titled Proving the Resurrection. I got a C-. Miss Burns was not persuaded at all. And I'll just tell you, I don't think I've gotten any better since then. I don't believe that the resurrection, belief in the resurrection is something that you can be proven into. I think it's something that you have to respond to when you begin to recognize it at work in your own life, in your own story. So my only aim today is just simply to help you to know what to look for. And to do that, we're going to look in the Bible at a story that was told in the Gospel of Luke, a story about two followers of Jesus who could not see and would not believe in the resurrection, even though it was right in front of them. And at the end, I'm going to give you three things that you can do, three ways that you can respond so that you can position yourself to see and even experience the resurrection in your own life. And the first two are going to be very, very simple. They're going to require very little of you. The third one is going to require more, but the return on that will be life-changing. Before we get there, let's dive into the story. It's found in the Gospel of Luke, which is in the New Testament portion of the Bible. The Bible is broken up into two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The New Testament starts with 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Each one of them are the story of Jesus, kind of like the biography of Jesus. Luke was a guy who he never met Jesus. He came to faith after when someone told him about Jesus, but his response was to investigate. He wanted to find out everything he could about these claims of Jesus. And so he went and he traveled and he interviewed everybody that he could who had encountered and met Jesus. And what he learned from that is what he wrote down in the Gospels. And Luke tells us that on this day, on the day that it was discovered that Jesus' tomb was empty, there were these two men who were leaving Jerusalem where the crucifixion had happened, and they were walking on their way home to their hometown. And these guys were distraught because as far as they knew, as far as they believed, the whole Jesus story, it was over. They had seen with their own eyes him torn to shreds by the Roman soldiers. They had seen how he had been hung on the cross until he had no breath in him, and how even after that a sword was driven through his heart. They had seen him buried. That was Friday, and now it's Sunday. And Luke tells us that they were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. So he's right there with them, but for some reason they can't recognize him. So Jesus asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still and their faces downcast, and without looking up at him, one of them named Cleopas, he asked him, he says, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" Jesus, doing what Jesus does, answering the question with another question, says, "What things?" "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied, and they go on to tell Jesus about Jesus. And they tell him that Jesus, he is a powerful man of God. He was the real deal. In fact, we had hoped that he was the one. He was the Messiah, the Savior who God had sent in order to set things straight and to make all things new. But his enemies, his powerful religious and political enemies, they put him to death. And they go on to tell Jesus, today, some people from our community, they went to where he's buried. They went to his tomb, and he's not there. And they claimed that they saw angels and that the angels told them that Jesus is alive. But when some of the leaders from our community went to the tomb to check it out, they didn't see Jesus there. The tomb was empty, but they didn't see any angels and they didn't see Jesus alive. So we don't know what to believe. We don't know what to think. It's like they've got two and they've got two, but they can't put them together and find four. And so Jesus talks to them and he says, how foolish you are. And how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter into his glory? And so he walks back through the story with them, beginning with Moses and all of the prophets. He explained to them what was said in all of the scriptures concerning himself. You see, these scriptures, these disciples were very familiar with this whole story. This was not new to them. They knew all these stories of the scriptures. They had learned it since they were children, but as they had been taught it, they were taught to expect the Messiah to be a conquering king, not a suffering servant. And so when Jesus dies on the cross, they have no frame of reference for this. They have no framework for this idea that this death of Jesus, that it was in fact necessary, and that it was somehow a victory over evil, and that all along this was part of the story, and that resurrection was a part of the story, that resurrection was always where this story was headed. In other words, they had the book, they had read the story, but they had never understood the meaning. And that left them in a place of despair and darkness. This moment kind of makes me think of one of my many parenting fails as a dad. When my son, super smart kid, when he was very, very little, he loved to read, even as a young kid. And so I thought, I want to bond with him. I love literature. And so I thought when he was 8 years old, it'd be a really good idea to give him the book Animal Farm. If you know, you know. He loves reading. He loves animals, a book with talking animals, right? I mean, this is perfect. It gets dark. I forgot how dark it gets. And you're not going to be surprised to learn that one day I hear Levi running down the stairs and he is sobbing. I mean, like uncontrollably, like you can't catch your breath sobbing. And he throws the book across the room at me and just blurts out, "Why would they do that to the pigs?" And I realized, I forgot about the slaughter scenes. Because at 8 years old, he's not processing that this is an allegory condemning the Russian Revolution. He's reading a story about talking animals and some really scary dogs who tear apart some poor little pigs. He didn't understand. There's no way he could comprehend the larger meaning of the story. And so he was just feeling viscerally the pain of that part of the story that he was in. You probably know what that's like. Have you found yourself there in your own story, feeling the pain of the chapter that you're in? And you can't believe that there could possibly be some larger meaning to the things that you're experiencing. That's where the disciples find themselves right now. And so Jesus tries to help them to elevate their perspective, to help them to see that, look, death was always a part of the plot, but it was never the end of the story. But as much as he tries, the light's not coming on for them. They still don't recognize him. And so they get to the village where they're going and they invite him to stay for dinner, and he agrees. And Luke tells us that when Jesus was at the table with them, though, he took bread and he gave thanks and he broke it and he began to give it to them. And then their eyes were open and they recognized him. And as soon as they finally recognized him, he disappeared from their sight. But they turned to each other and they asked one another, weren't our hearts burning inside of us as he laid out the scriptures, as he walked with us and opened up the scriptures to us? And so they couldn't just sleep on it. They immediately get up and they run all the way back to Jerusalem. And they tell all of the other disciples what had happened. And they tell them how they had seen Jesus and how they had recognized him when he broke the bread. Now, On the surface of this story, it's a story about people who did not recognize Jesus and they did not believe in the resurrection, even though the evidence was right in front of them. And then suddenly, they were able to see Jesus for who he really is. And that sparked in them the faith to believe in the resurrection, that the resurrection had really happened. So that's what's happening in the text. But for us to look past the text and to understand the meaning of it specifically for us in our day, wherever you are in your story, I think we have to lean into two of the questions that this story brings up. First of all, why were the disciples unable to recognize Jesus at first? And secondly, what opened their eyes so that they could recognize him? So first of all, why were they unable to recognize Jesus at first? There's actually a few theories on this. The first theory is the natural explanation. They're walking west, and it's late in the afternoon, and so maybe the sun was in their eyes, and so they just couldn't see him. Maybe. But that doesn't explain why they didn't recognize his voice or why they didn't recognize him when he was inside until he broke the bread. The other explanation, another one, is the supernatural explanation. There are some people who will suggest that God supernaturally kept them from recognizing Jesus. Maybe, but why? I mean, Jesus was spending all of this time going to great lengths to try to help them to see him in the scriptures. Why would he then also hide from them? The third explanation is the one that resonates with me, and that's the psychological explanation. Maybe they didn't recognize Jesus because they were already certain about what can and what can't be true. Dead people don't come back to life. That's the way it is. And so their preconceived certainty about the way it is blinded them from what they didn't expect to see, which is actually the way the brain works, right? There's a psychological term for this. It's called the perceptual set. It explains our tendency to see the things that we expect to see. Our brain is always filtering information, and it filters information based on what we already believe before we come on that information. So it fills in the blanks, and it skips over the impossible and the irrelevant data. Like, when you buy a car and all of a sudden you see that car everywhere, there aren't just more cars. You're not actually hip. It's just that now you are looking to see it. Or when you're proofreading your own manuscript and there's a typo, but your brain auto corrects it, and so you miss that thing. It's that our minds, they don't just see, they also predict. And so if we know that that's the case, that our expectations shape what we see in the physical, we shouldn't be surprised that that's also true in the spiritual. Like if you've already decided what's impossible, like God becoming human, resurrection, healing, redemption. If you've already decided that's impossible, then you're going to naturally filter out anything that doesn't fit your belief. It's commonly said that seeing is believing, but I think it's probably more true that believing is seeing. I mean, two people can look at the same sunset and one says, yeah, it's, the earth turning again. And the other person is in awe at the glory that God has embedded in his creation. Same moment, same sunset, but two very different meanings. Why? Because what you believe shapes what you see. And that's what I think is going on with the disciples here. They didn't expect to see the resurrection, so they couldn't see it, even when it was right in front of them. So then what did open their eyes so they could recognize Jesus? Well, Luke tells us specifically that Jesus took bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them. And when he did, that's when their eyes were opened and they recognized him for who he was. Some suggest that what turned the light on for them was that they saw Jesus in the ordinary. That it was this moment where they were seeing Jesus, God with us in this ordinary moment, in their ordinary house, around this ordinary table with this ordinary meal. The discovery of Jesus in real life, breaking bread with him like he was a friend. That's what helped them to see him for who he was. And I'll just say, for me, that was a significant shift in my faith when I stopped only looking for God to show up in the dramatic. And I began to see him and recognize him in the day-to-day, the mundane parts of my life. To hear his voice, not just in the thunder, but in the whispers. It's a powerful thing when you recognize Jesus present in the ordinary. So I like that idea. Maybe that's what it was. But it does seem like Luke is trying to get us to see something else, because this is not the first time that he has used this sequence of verbs. In fact, he's used this exact sequence of verbs twice before in his gospel. The first time is when Jesus miraculously fed 5,000 people with just a few loaves and fishes. The way Luke describes that moment, it says that taking the 5 loaves and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. And then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. So it could be that the disciples were there, these 2 disciples were there, and if they were there, maybe it was the reminder of seeing Jesus do the thing that he had done before. Having seen Jesus do the impossible before, it sparked their faith to believe, yeah, of course, he can do the impossible again. And that's what gave them the faith to believe in the resurrection. That it was recalling the extraordinary that opened their eyes. And it's true that sometimes the way forward for your faith, it begins by you taking a moment to look back. To see those things that we maybe explained away, but they're evidence of God at work in our lives before. To recall where God has been showing up in our story. Where the impossible thing, it somehow happened. Where something that you thought was dead, a relationship, a career, a dream, somehow it came back to life. All of that is evidence that Jesus is alive and that he is setting things straight and that he is making all things new. And that same power of resurrection that brought him out of the grave, it's active in your life and he can do that again. I like that idea too. But there's another time when Luke uses these same 4 verbs together, and it's at the Last Supper. Luke tells us that Jesus took bread, he gave thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this to remember me." Now, we know that in another resurrection appearance, Jesus specifically showed the wounds in his hands to other disciples in order to spark faith in them. I wonder, it doesn't say it, but I wonder if in this moment they're around the table and he takes the bread, and as he extends his hands to hand the bread to them, if they don't see those wounds in his wrists. And all of a sudden everything comes together for them. That the one who took and blessed and broke and gave the bread to them, that he's the one who has been taken and blessed and broken and given for them, given for all of us. His brokenness for our healing. And maybe it was that when they saw Jesus in the brokenness and in the breaking, maybe that's what opened their eyes. Jesus met them there in their confusion, in their pain, in their exhaustion, in their brokenness. And I think you probably know something about brokenness. You know what it's like to feel, what it feels like when something you counted on all of a sudden falls apart. A marriage, a friendship, a job. You know that pain of burnout or what it feels like when your prayers go unanswered. Maybe you know what it's like to receive that diagnosis that has just now changed everything. I can say for me personally, I have met Jesus in brokenness more than once. In moments of shame, in failure. When I've got all questions and no answers. When those that I love have died. And in those moments, he comes close, and he came close to me to remind me that, look, yes, breaking is a part of this story, but it's not the ending. This is all headed towards resurrection. So I like this too. Maybe it was all three of these. Maybe what opened their eyes is they saw how Jesus is present in the ordinary, in the everyday, that he's with you when you don't even think to look at him. He's with you in the mundane parts of life. Maybe it's because they looked back and they remembered the extraordinary and all those things that he has done in your past to bring you to this point. And maybe they met him in the breaking, which is where he wants to meet us in those moments of our own loss and confusion. But all that brings us back to the question that we started with today. How do you recognize resurrection in your own story? Well, just like the disciples, they had something that was first keeping them from recognizing Jesus, keeping them from recognizing the resurrection. We also have to ask that question of ourselves. What is it that might be keeping me from seeing the reality of resurrection in my life? If you're new here for the first time, if we've never met, I probably look super familiar to you. And that's just because you probably recognize me from Big Dogs, the very popular TV crime drama. It's so popular, it's on Amazon Prime. And that's probably why you've seen it. In this TV series, it's a lot like Law & Order, except imagine Law & Order was canceled. It would be just exactly the same kind of thing. The inciting incident in this TV series was when a Syrian immigrant named Emir, who is a cab driver, he gets murdered. I'm Emir. Dead cabbie from Syria. And I got to tell you, I was excellent. I was excellent in this role. I hit all my marks. I stayed in character. Nailed every line. Believable. It was believable. And my opportunity to do this, it all came about because I was in a coffee shop one day, writing a sermon actually, and the casting director for this show walked in, and she took one look at me and she thought, I want to see this guy dead. And so I was excited. I signed up. I said yes. I got the call. I went to the set, and it was so much fun for me. I love this stuff. I always wanted to do this. I went through wardrobe. I went through makeup. Got a bullet hole in my head. I love the whole deal. Met the crew. Met the actors. I got my own handler. They said talent walking. It was the funnest. I loved every minute of it. And so I was down there on the ground, and we were rehearsing. And rehearsal, I'm just giddy. I'm just giddy at how much fun I'm having, and the actors are going through it. And the way during the rehearsal, the actor would kneel down and he would pantomime pulling the sheet, away. But we weren't going through that in rehearsal. And then he would begin his lines, and his first line was the F word. And so I knew I could never tell my mom about this. And so we're having a great time, and then all of a sudden, the director's like, all right, let's go. We're going to go for real. And they put the sheet now over my head. And in this moment is when the panic sets in. Because now I think to myself, all right, I got to make a decision. Eyes open, eyes closed. What do I go with here, right? I mean, I've never played a dead guy before. I've never been dead. What's my motivation? I don't understand. I don't know what to do. And so I'm going through all this in my head. I mean, because eyes open, that's way more dramatic, right? Eyes closed is kind of lazy. It's very amateurish. It's going to be easier. I don't want to throw away my shot. So I'm deciding, you know what? I make the decision. Eyes open. I'm going for it. And so I'm under the sheet. My eyes are open, and then as soon as the director says action, I remember blinking, and I think, oh my gosh, blinking. What am I going to do? What if I blink? I'm going to ruin the whole thing. They're going to kick me out of here. This was my big opportunity, and so just as the sheet begins to pull back, I close my eyes, and that's it. You can't open them again, and so forever, Amir, the cabbie, dead with his eyes closed. I regret it, I think I could have been great. But here's the point. If you ever happen to be playing a dead guy in a TV series and you choose to close your eyes, you can't open them again. They stay closed. But here's the great thing about real life. One of the great benefits of being alive is that you can always open up your eyes. you can always open up your eyes to see some things that maybe you've closed your eyes to before. Some things you've never been willing to see before. You can open yourself to consider something that you've never considered before. You can ask yourself, hey, wait a second. What if I've been missing something all along? So the question, what is keeping you from seeing the reality of resurrection in your life? I mean, could it be you? Are you keeping yourself from seeing Jesus because you've chosen to keep your eyes closed to him? What if you were to open your eyes and look again? If you were to consider the possibility, if you were to open your eyes to the reality of resurrection in your story, you might see, wow, resurrection is all around me. It looks like death giving way to life. Every time spring replaces winter, every time a new child is born into the world. You might see that resurrection, it looks like chaos giving way to meaning when your past all of a sudden begins to make sense. And you find that there has been a story being written in every day, in every season, every chapter all along. You might find that resurrection, it looks like brokenness giving away to purpose. When you find that those wounds that you have, they've actually prepared you to be a healer for others. You might find that resurrection, it looks like doubt giving way to faith. As instead of fearing what if it isn't true, you begin to bravely ask, what if it is true? And in that moment, you begin to believe. You see, the resurrection is more than just something that happened once long ago. It has been happening. It is happening in the ordinary, in every chapter of your story, beneath all the pain. Because the resurrection is real, it means that you are more loved by God than you could ever dare to imagine. Because the resurrection is real, it means that you're not just here to survive, but you're on this earth on purpose and for a purpose. Because the resurrection is real, it means that the scars in your life, they tell a story, not just a story of loss and pain, but a story of redemption that's still being written. Because the resurrection is real, it means that Jesus isn't just somebody that you can know about. It means that he's a God that you can know for real. Because the resurrection is real, it means that every moment, even this moment, is what he has been leading you to all along. That even this moment is the moment he invites you to respond to the reality of the resurrection in your life. So I'm just going to end with 3 ways that you can respond to his invitation to put yourself in a position to see and to experience resurrection in your own story. The first is super simple. Maybe you would say, listen, I am unconvinced. I'm with Miss Burns. I'm not persuaded, dude. But I am curious. And if you are willing to open your eyes, if you're willing to consider what you may not have considered before, I want to invite you to just simply say a simple prayer. You could do it today. You could do it now. You could do it sometime this week. Just say, God, if you're there, if this is real, show me. I have several friends who just simply said that prayer. They dared to say that prayer and their life changed forever. God, if you're there, if you're real, just show me. I believe that's a prayer he'll answer. The second way that you can respond is also simple. Maybe you're not convinced, but you would say, listen, I am exploring. I am on this search. I want to invite you to come back next week. To just come back, just decide now I'm going to come back to church next week. Next week we're beginning a new series. In the series, we're really going to be talking all about true spirituality. Not empty religion, not empty spiritualism. Both of those things leave us really disappointed. But we're going to talk about how you can encounter and know the real and personal God. How you can experience him in your life. how you can find yourself empowered by him to live a life of freedom and purpose, a full life that God has always had in mind for you. The third one is the most important response you can make. And that's to say yes to the invitation of Jesus. To say, listen, I'm ready to put my faith in him. I'm ready to invite the work of resurrection in my life. And maybe that's a decision that you have never made. Maybe a relationship with God is something you've never had. You've never invited Jesus into your life. Or maybe it's something you did, but it's been a long time and you've walked away and you've been leading your own life. God's been put into the margins. The New Testament tells us that if we will openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, that you will be saved. And what that means is this. It means that when we say yes to Jesus, it's the decision that makes us right with God. It's in that decision that all the separation between us and God, it's bridged. And Jesus brings us into that right relationship with God. Every sin is forgiven. Every barrier between us and God, it's out of the way. And it means that he comes and he gives us that new kind of life, that God-connected life. The life that he died and rose from the dead to give us. The life that is always being renewed, always being transformed, always being reformed. It's the most important decision that we can make, but it's a personal decision. And so before we end today, I just to make this space a sacred space, I want to ask you if you would bow your heads. Just you and God. If you would say, I want to begin or I want to start over in my relationship with God. And I'm ready to put my trust in Jesus, to put my faith in him and invite him to bring resurrection into my life. Then I want to pray for you today. So that you would say, I want to start my relationship with God. I want to be right with him. I want to experience the life that he has for me. Would you just slip up your hand so I can see it? I want to pray for you. Yes. You say, I want to say yes to Jesus today. Yes. Anybody else? You could put your hands down. I'm going to pray in a moment, and I want to invite you, if you raised your hand, or maybe you didn't raise your hand, but you would say, listen, I'm ready to get right with God. I'm ready to invite him into my life. I'm ready to experience the life that he has for me. Then I want to invite you to pray along with me. And look, if you're a follower of Jesus, would you pray with us too? Just as an affirmation of your faith. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you. I believe that you died to make me right with you. I believe you rose from the dead to give me a new kind of life. So I put my trust in you as the Savior that I need, my healer, the leader of my life. Help me to recognize resurrection, to recognize how you are at work in my past and in my present, and lead me in your way from here on out. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for loving me. Amen. Amen. Hey, will you stand with me? We're going to